My name's Tony Howson. I'm a poet. I'm a storyteller. I take photographs. I try and find ways of expressing myself which are different. I don't believe you can just read a poem or read a book. I believe you've got to step inside a picture, get up on the stage with the actors and walk around invisibly with them to understand what things are really all about. Which is why I've asked Juliana Snapper, Jules to me, to come and join me in this studio today to talk about how we can use different art forms to understand other art forms. Jules, tell us what you do.
Tony, I'm delighted to be here. I'm an opera singer. I'm also a creator of opera, and I write about it. And I'm interested in exploring kind of how can opera work as a technology of expression? How does it work? Where can we take it? What else can it do? I read a review of your book, Tony, that describes the reading as crying for 100 pages. I want to learn, how can I make a listener cry for 100 minutes? What's more operatic?
Wow, that's a great goal to have, I think, because sometimes the arts stand a little bit too far away from people sometimes. We need to get right in the center and they need to come inside us as well. So today, we're going to take one of my poems from my new book, Love, Hate and Fragility, and we're going to see how we can mix it, change it, get new meaning from it by putting it alongside an operatic mind, a way of thinking differently about what this poem is all about. So, let's get on with it. I know absolutely tiddly squat about opera. What do you think opera can bring to poetry?
Well, Tony, opera makes big promises. She's not a tame beast, though. She can take a text and she can vibrate it into your bones. But she's unwieldy, she's big, she's loud. She can also do a lot of damage.
Do you see similarities between opera and poetry?
A little like a Mack truck and a motorcycle. But I think both of them try to get at meanings within language that happen in the in-betweens, that don't maybe come out of discursive or like just conversational language or reporting or storytelling as usual.
I think there are similarities, really, between the two. I mean, poetry takes a messy human emotion, distills it into a few lines, and then tries to hit you with some weight. In a sense, opera does the same, doesn't it, with this great sense of theatre and the sound that it creates and the costumes. It's very visual as well as very sensual on the hearing. Why don't we take a poem? Why don't we take a poem and try and see what we can do with it with opera in mind? Because we know we can't, create a total opera from one poem. But the poem we're going to read, or I'm going to read in a short while, has a poem that goes before it that sets the scene. And that poem is called Shush. And I think maybe if you could read that scene setter, and then I'll follow on from there.
Okay, it would be my pleasure. Shush. The world is bedlam, a whirlpool of madness, swirling white heat, searing flesh. World turned like the minch boiling, Morpheus churning, mill pond to maelstrom. This is where it all started, in a phosphorus flash, amidst the home front rubble. Smoke choking dust, settling layers, upon the brick turned to brimstone. Twisted iron fences, contorting, snagging life's forgotten ordinary things. A teddy bear, a shirt, a bra, a clutching hand that could not hold on. Lost, amongst the blood-stained bricks, a woman not just blown apart, but stoned to her death. Silence cradles the vaporized body, a stunned spirit wrapped in a dust cloud. Nothing more.
Thank you for that. That was very strong. The poem I'm going to read is called The Weeping Working Man. I knew he was a working man, his fingers thick, hands rough and creases on his face. Older than his years, the blackness of oil and grime ingrained. He rolls his own cigarettes, nicotine stains on his finger, stain upon stain. I watch him weep. Tears left streaks down his cheeks. Those hardened hands, knuckles white, clutched the bra, the teddy bear, the shirt. The bra, those rough fingers, once unclipped to feel warm flesh with a loving care. I watched his love turn to hate. In the dampness of his heavy eyes there was a flame that flared, the colour of the furnace, where his thoughts and dreams were thrown, as if he could strangle and butcher in a sweat so cold. His hell was revenge. What strikes you about this poem? Lines that perhaps stand out that you can use in kind of a musical sense?
The poem as it is whole. And your reading of it already vibrates that into the air. So my first thought in thinking about voicing this operatically is really how do we keep the fine fibers that you can feel of this, and in working with that fabric, not let those be flattened. There's such rhythm in how you've written the phrases, and tempo changes and dynamics already implicit in it. It's kind of already a score, right? And there's a curvature to the way that the words flow, right? That has within it its own melody. And when you're reading that, we hear that so clearly, that rhythm and that melody and that pacing and those dynamics. So how do I maintain that? How do I pull those threads?
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in. How do you pull those threads? What are the challenges going to be for you once you actually start thinking about how to turn it into something operatic?
So in its simplest forms, we can look at opera as having two kinds of voices. One of them is more spoken, right? It kind of works with the flow of language. And one of them kind of pulls on words, repeats them, sustains them, puts lots of little melismatic passages within them to kind of illustrate what those words are meaning. So for me, I come to stain upon stain, and there's a kind of sob in there, stain upon stain, stain upon stain. This man feels like he's a quiet man. He's expressing himself in gestures and his work, but he's feeling very intensely. And you see his tears in the dirt that's collected in the crevices of his face that you describe. So I hear stain, stain upon stain. I watched him weep, weep, weep. There's a kind of already written into the poem. For me, there's a refrain there. But to keep the integrity of the flow, the finer fabric, the beginning needs to speak. I knew he was a working man, his fingers thick, hands rough. That automatically slows down. Fingers thick, hands rough. It takes work within your mouth, right? There's effort in there. There's to sound those words, and it slows down. It gets noisy. And if I were to over-operatize that, if I sang, his fingers thick, his hands rough, I could do it, but it steamrolls the meanings, right? We lose something from that.
There must be a big difference between the kind of lyric that you would be singing for actual opera and this poetry, because this was never written with this intention at all. but somehow you're using that emotion to actually make it into something different and make it into something new, or you're capturing that emotion because it's obviously there inside the poem. How do you think people are going to listen to this? Because they're going to hear something very different, are they? Can you keep the meaning of the poem, or do you think that meaning will change as you interpret it?
It becomes, in a way, a poem on top of a poem, or this kind of layering of texts. So the music starts to shape the words, hopefully in a way that stays true to the words themselves. And then the voice colors that. Right? So I would say in every case, something is lost when you take a text, especially a poetic text, and you put that into an opera.
You say something is lost, but what do you think is gained?
Hopefully it lets you live within those words a little longer, right, and a little more deeply. So there's a kind of a sensual aspect to it. Right? So you can, in the simplest sense, you're thinking about those stains a little longer, right? Because it's stain. Right? And you're feeling that as you listen, I think. Right? You feel that in your own tongue, your own cheeks.
I suppose one of the differences here is that this poem is contained in a book. Somebody can read it, they can assess it, they can go back over things again. With opera, it's more one-off, isn't it? If you're performing on a stage, it's a one-off kind of time you have to understand something. How easy is it to create that memory of what this is all about inside an opera? You can't go back over so easily.
I think some operas are meant to really convey a story in simple terms, right? You have there's the drama that can be conveyed, right? And within that, much nuance, but not necessarily within the language itself. Ideally, you do hear an opera many times, because I think you can't quite catch it in the first listen, even if you already know the story, even if you are already intimate with the poetry.
I suppose in a sense, for poetry, you're building a relationship with one reader, somebody who's taking the book, they're looking at it. Of course, you can perform the poem as well, but you're aiming at one person in a sense. That person has many different identities and, whatever else. But with opera, you're looking at an audience, aren't you? So you've got to capture, I suppose, the essence of everything that's being performed on the stage. But at the same time, how do you make it relevant for that one person who's sat in the front row or in the back row and it feels important for them?
Well, you go onto the stage with an interpretation and living with that text and thinking about this, thinking about what the composers brought to that, thinking about the different interpretations that have been sung before, right? You study that. You have your idea of what this means and how this can mean more, what your body can bring to that. And then you get on stage and you start to feel for the audience. Right? You can't quite see through the bright lights, but you're feeling for when there are little sighs from the audience, when there are little sounds, or just something energetic that is telling you, okay, lean this way, lean that way.
I spoke to a young student, a law student from Turkey, who's now studying law in Germany recently. And she went to her first opera. She's, 22, 23 years old now. And she came out and said, I didn't understand the language, but I understood the visual element. I understood the story. I took so much from it because it was emotionally powerful visually, and the sound was enough for me to understand the story and the movement on the stage. I thought for me that was fantastic. That's something you can't really create in a poem, I don't think, although you can try and get into people's heads with that in mind, because poems are stories in many ways as well. If you had to hinge this, when you go back and you start thinking about how you're going to turn it into something new and different, what's the hinge from this poem? Is there a couple of lines there which actually think this is where it will come together? Or is it too early to say?
With this poem, there's a complexity that's not always present in an aria, and there are different invisible characters within this. Right? There's the one that's being described, right, and we feel in a very visceral way his love, right? Even though that's just it's kind of an imprint, right? That's now an absence. And we also have the person that was lost, and we have the witness, someone who's giving very careful attention to this person. And so it's hard to say exactly where that hinge is. I watched him weep. There you have the witness, and then the person with the stains coming down his cheeks. His hell was revenge. We know something there about this character and about the witness. We have traces throughout, mostly in these artifacts, the bra, the teddy bear, the shirt, right? These scraps that represent this very whole and once very vital life.
The book is love, hate, and fragility, and there is you've got the love element here, and we're seeing it to some extent through this poem. Well, this is part of the intention, as it turns into hate, and maybe we haven't got fully established a fragility in here, but the fragility is his grief, isn't it? To some extent, his body, his persona, is being allowed to turn into something which was once strong in love, but now revenge. He's starting to hate those who are responsible for what's happened, and killed something very precious, but he's still got the love, but it's fighting now with the hate. The hate is going to come forward, and he is prepared to go out there and butcher and take revenge. In opera, that's quite significant turning point visually and on a stage. Does it come across visually inside the poem, I wonder?
Yes, I mean, you have here really an entire libretto. You could do a 3-hour opera really off of this text. You have so much going on with this. Yeah. And of course opera slows things down, right? So we're living with each kind of section of this in time, in a different way.
For me, words can be meaningless without intonation, without the body language. These are what give the words a meaning. When you're reading a poem, you can't see that. You have to kind of picture it in your head. With opera, it's much more visual. Does that make the storytelling much more effective in opera, do you think?
Let me pivot a little bit.
Okay.
Let me turn your questions on you.
Oh, no. Okay.
If I'm asking you for direction on this,
mm-hmm.
and I am, where do you see these hinges? Where are the sections of text where special attention needs to be given? Where do you want time to expand within this?
I think for me, it's kind of in that opening we have a certain slower pace. I think we're feeling the love which is seeping, which is weeping and marking the face. So that makes me think of a slower pace. But then I think as he starts to remember the gentleness, the unclipping of the bra, the kind of coming together as a loving couple, and that memory, I think we're changing a certain level of intensity. And so I suppose if you're going to do that visually, you have to have some movement which shows that kind of breathing, that kind of agony of something once so special, which is now disappearing. And then you've got this kind of burning mention of a furnace, the furnace of the place where he works, perhaps in a steel works or somewhere like that. And he's going to throw those dreams he had, those ambitions and desires are going into that furnace to burn. And that's a flare. that's a flare-up of something. And I think that's something that you have to find within yourself when you're reading it as a poem, but in opera, you can express that on the stage. It brings people straight into that image. You're not going to be finding it so much yourself. It's going to be given to you. And I think that for me is powerful and strong. They're both powerful and strong, but they're working in kind of different, subtle ways of capturing people's minds and thoughts.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I think that even when you're speaking about it, right, the way that your voice goes into speaking of this flame, this furnace, the color of this, and you're talking about these images, but these images are also sounds, right? And it's also this intensity that can happen vocally. It's called fioratura, right? Fireworks, right? You send the voice out to these extremes that kind of test the body and kind of test these limits, and that then kind of graze violence. And then in the poem, to me, that it almost cools suddenly, and there's fragility there, right? There's this iron that's white hot, that violence that's almost there, and then a sweat so cold.
I'm watching you say this, and if I could just describe it, there's a great intensity. Your hands are kind of like clawing in the air there, and your eyes are kind of going brighter, and you're very kind of bringing in attention and letting it go again with your body movements. Is that what opera teaches you? Is that how, or is that just how you naturally express yourself?
It comes from the inside, right? So it's all one instrument.
Uh-huh.
So the intensity that builds, that you feel within your gut, right? It makes its way out, and it makes its way out in sound, and it makes its way out to your fingertips, right? Into the gesture that throws the plate at the wall when you're angry.
In a sense, that's what you've got to do when you're performing poetry, I suppose. You've got to take that plate and skim it around the room, bouncing it off the walls and making it smash. Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you for all those nice things and great visual things that you've actually just portrayed in this studio. But what we need you to do is to go away for a little while and to think about how you can bring this together into one piece. I think if that's possible, I hope. Fingers are crossed here; they're really crossed. But there's also, so people know, if you want to read this poem, you can get the book, and the book there's a link on the site here that you can go to, and you can have a look at the book and see what you think of it, and see what you can make of it, and maybe try and turn it into some musical show yourselves if that's what you want to do. That's fine. So we'll just take a short pause then, and you go off and you can do your thing, and then we can come back and have a listen.
Wonderful. I knew he was a working man, his fingers thick, hands rough, and creases on his face. I knew he was a working man. Older than his ears, older than his ears, older than his ears, and creases on his face. The blackness of oil and grime ingrained. Older than his years, older than his years. The blackness of oil and grime ingrained, cigarettes, nicotine stains on his fingers, fingers thick, hands rough, fingers thick, hands rough. Stain upon stain, stain upon stain, stain upon stain. I watched him weep. I watched him. Tears left streaks down his cheeks.
Jules, I think you've taken the words out of me. Really, I'm just totally amazed by what you've done, and I know you've had the help of Pieter, your brother, and Esra, and Never, and I think you've done it. You've turned something into an amazing piece that takes that poem somewhere else. It just affects me so much. Wow, thank you very much. I really wasn't expecting that at all. It created a big emotion inside of me, brought tears to my eyes even. That was Jules taking a piece of my poetry, improvising it, composing it in real time, and that's what she came up with. And it was, I have to say, we started off this program talking with Jules mentioning that somebody said about my book that they cried for 100 pages, and her goal was to make somebody cry for 100 minutes. And I think I'm going to be crying for 100 minutes at least. So I think we actually have really achieved something in this experiment. This was an experiment for us, looking at how we can build two things together, opera, poetry. And I think it was a great success. If you want to check out the book, well, go to the blurb attached to this program and the links will be there. You can find out more about Jules's work by going to her website, julianasnapper.com. And thanks to Pieter Snapper, who engineered this program. I hope you've enjoyed it and that we meet again one day. Thank you very much.